Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Mark Peck, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Joint Regional Transportation Agency that will be commonly referred to this evening as the JRTA. And perhaps what we'll do is we'll start off with a land acknowledgement first, and then we'll get into some housekeeping issues. So in terms of the land acknowledgement, we acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1729. We acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. So, thanks for advancing the slide. As mentioned, folks, my name is Mark Peck. I'm here with a fabulous team that's comprised of members of the team from the JRTA and HRM. And as well, we have two individuals that are going to be doing simultaneous translation for us this evening, both Julia and Monica. This is a recorded session, and the session itself will naturally starts off at 6:30. We should be done by 8 o'clock. Recognizing that it is Tuesday evening and you may have some interruptions or may have a few other things to do this evening. This is recorded and will be available on our website for your viewing. And as well, there'll be an opportunities for questions and answers at the end of the session. That's preferred if everyone's okay with that. And those Q&As will also post on our website. So welcome to the JRTA, the Joint Regional Transportation Agency. This evening, we're going to answer a bunch of questions in terms of who we are, what we do, where is the area that we're covering, when is the plan due, what's it all about, and how are we going about doing this plan, and what is the information associated with determining what the plan will look like. It's in response to a Government's Act, which Tanya will cover off. And transportation, look, we've been growing not exponentially, but in historical population growth that both HRM and other municipalities throughout Nova Scotia has never seen before. I met with Pam Cooley this morning for lunch, and Pam and I both discussed the work of the JRTA and said that our timing is almost perfect in terms of where we are and the work that needs to be done. I would like to acknowledge some folks that I believe are in attendance this evening. We have 4 members of the Legislative Assembly that are with us here this evening. Minister Twyla Gross, MLA Danielle Barkhouse, MLA Stephen Craig, and MLA Melissa Sheehy Richard. And I believe there's some folks on elected councils as well throughout our region, and a couple of shout outs who I believe have signed on. I believe Marcus Garrett is out there in video land. I believe that Marianne McGrath is out there, and Steve Proctor as well from the bridge. So just a special hello from the JRTA, and welcome everyone. Next slide, please. With us this evening, I mentioned the team from the JRTA. With us this evening is Tanya Davis, Vice President of the JRTA. We have Matt Neville, planner. We have Dave Espeseth, who is our transportation planner, and Megan Couture, who's in charge of engagement and communications. And with us from our consulting company of HDR is Reese Wolf and Jordan Talker. A little plug for the HDR team. One of the things Nova Scotia is blessed with are 2, perhaps what I would say, this is just my opinion, and perhaps the opinion of others, 2 of the best in the business. HDR, well represented here this evening with Reese and Jordan. And as well, we have a company, WSP, Mossam Dougal, who is their primary lead. And as well, WSP is working with the University of Toronto, Dr. Eric Miller. So rest assured that Nova Scotia have some of the best in the world that are developing this plan on behalf of you, the Nova Scotians that are here this evening, and those that were unable to attend as well. Next slide, please. What I should have mentioned, and I didn't, we have two special guests with us here this evening. We have a facilitator who is no stranger to us in the municipal government. That's Sarah Thompson. Sarah is the manager of the Collective Impact for Environment and Climate Change with HRM, the team working on the Halifax and the climate change plan, the climate plan for Halifax. And with her as well, I believe, is Zaina Lamontagne, I believe, is joining us here this evening as well to help us facilitate and guide the session. I'll refer to my notes here. I think I pretty much covered off everything that I wanted to mention. So why is the transportation important? I think that's the theme this evening. I think that's a question that really deserves not a lot of commentary, because I believe it's fairly self-explanatory. It's what drives our economy, and it's what drives Nova Scotia. No pun intended. So it plays a significant role in our day-to-day, whether it's to work, whether it's the movement of goods, whether it's active transportation, all of those modes. So it's the movement of people and goods that will play a key role in terms of how we develop our plan. And we're looking to develop a safe and an efficient and an equitable system within our plan. So having said that, those are the introductory comments from me. I apologize for the voice. I have a bit of a cold. So what I'm going to do is turn off my voice and turn off the video. And I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who I think is going to take us through a few other housekeeping issues, and we'll go from there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We have a really informative session and also a chance to hear from you. So we just finished the welcome and overview, and we're going to move into a little bit of a check-in and just kind of getting some of the perspectives of you and why you came tonight. And then we're going to have a presentation on the kind of where the plan is to date, and some time for question and discussions. And so on the next slide, we're using a Mentimeter. So if you haven't used it before, you can either go to mentimeter.com and enter the code that's at the top of the screen, or you can take a picture of the QR code and it will take you right to the site. But we'd love to just hear, why did you come tonight? What brought you here? And why does transportation matter to you? And we'll just give you a moment to fill out that form and to get some of your perspectives, and then we'll kind of see we'll see the results. And as people take a moment to fill in the Mentimeter, we're also open if one or two people want to speak by voice. Feel free to raise your hand and chime in as well. We're definitely hearing that we're interested in cycling safety for our family, that we want BRT, that transit is too slow, we want to make it faster, less car culture, trains. Yeah, the fact that not being able to drive limits our ability to see the province. And Dawn raised her hand, so maybe we'll just hear from Dawn as we see these other thoughts roll in.
Hello, my name is Dawn Penny, and I'm a prospective candidate for District 13 in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And it'll be my third time running in this area. And so over the past 13 years of campaigning, I have been an advocate to bring in public transportation in these areas, because as someone who has had a vehicle off and on and living in these rural spaces, when you lose your car, you can't get to work if there's no public transportation. So I want to thank everyone that's here tonight for providing more information, and just excited to move forward and hear from other people in their needs for transportation as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Dawn. And just kind of I'm sure a lot of you are reading and seeing, but there's a lot of themes around transit, public transportation, lowering emissions, having a voice for the workers in transit, and definitely bike lanes, trails, age-friendly communities. And I'm going to also invite Colin to speak.
Yes, my name is Colin Cameron, and I'm chairman of the Musco Rider Transportation Cooperative based out of Porters Lake. And I've been involved with trying to get transportation on the Eastern Shore since we lost the Zincs bus, which went from Sherbrooke daily trips to Halifax. So the Musco Rider Cooperative is at capacity. We are turning away people all the time because we don't have enough drivers. We now have 7 vehicles based in Porters Lake. We have wheelchair accessible vehicles in Porters Lake and 3 vehicles in Sheet Harbor. I was chairman of the Ratepayers Association in Musquodoboit Harbor in 2008 and attended a meeting at City Hall where I was promised that Metro X would be coming to Musquodoboit Harbor by 2010. So now it's 2024. The population in Musquodoboit Harbor is exploding. There's a proposed 140 home development in the core of the village. There's a possibility that Nova Scotia Community College will be setting up a satellite campus in the soon to be abandoned Eastern Shore District High School. Those people not every student can afford a car. People living in low income housing cannot afford a car. So to have public transportation to Musquodoboit Harbor would be exceedingly good. I know people who live in Austria Lake who drive to Porters Lake to pick up the Metro X bus. So they have to drive through Musquodoboit Harbor to go to Porters Lake to pick up the Metro X bus. So I know there's a demand, there's a need for students to go to work, for people for medical appointments. We had a service, now we no longer have a service. So I'm really hoping that Metro X will extend their service to Musquodoboit Harbor. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And maybe we'll just take this last comment from Lyle before we move on. And it's great. We'll capture all of these comments in the notes from the meeting as well. Lyle?
Hello, it's Lyle Mailman. I live in Beaverbank, and transportation is important because of kind of the rural, urban, suburban area that we're starting to live in, and as developments come in and kind of that push for urban sprawl continues out, there's a real need for connections to the main arteries, to the 100 series highways and around, to divert things like truck traffic and to make our rural, now turning into suburban environments, safer for being able to commute and wait at a bus stop and those sorts of things. Also, there's always the discussion of like commuter rail and things like that too, that Beaverbank has those options. And especially just to bring attention to the Margison Drive Beaverbank bypass option as kind of that next ring of growth that would potentially connect the 102 Beaverbank, 101 Hammonds Plains Road, and the 103. So yeah, I've been paying close attention to the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Lyle. Yeah, and I'm just going to call out that there's been a few more comments around really looking at how we're linking transportation planning to land use planning, how we're kind of keeping up with the growing population, issues of traffic, and yeah, really lots of great thoughts. And so let's move on to the presentation. And I'm going to hand it over, but there'll be more time again for questions and discussion at the end. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So hi, everybody. I'm Tanya Davis. I'm the Vice President here at the Joint Regional Transportation Agency, and super excited to have everybody there. And I know MLA Nickel is also on the call, and I think we missed her name earlier. So just welcoming everybody really to this really important conversation. So I want to share with you a little bit more around some of our background on, how the JRTA came to be. So, what is the JRTA? So we're a provincial Crown Corp. We were created in the fall of 2021 to address transportation issues associated with the rapid growth in Halifax and surrounding communities. As some people have just mentioned, we're growing really quickly. So this government put in place the JRTA to help kind of start thinking about that and starting to figure out how to address those issues related to that. Our mission really is around champion regional collaboration. We can't do this alone. We need to think about this in a collaborative way and how we're going to advance transportation solutions through joint planning, partnerships, data-driven analysis, and strategic investments. And our mandate really is to plan for all modes of transportation that is consistent with that growth and development, and ensure that there's a safe, efficient, and coordinated movement of people and goods. Next slide. So our core partners. So when our legislation was set up, in the legislation, it actually identifies some of our core partners. And you can see on this slide, there are core partners of the Department of Public Works, Halifax Regional Municipality, Halifax Harbour Bridges, Halifax Stanfield Airport, Port of Halifax, ACOA joined. And just recently, in October of this year, we're pleased to say that CN was also our partners. So of these partners, you can see that there's 3 levels of government sitting at our technical advisory board. And many of these either own, operate, or fund transportation in the region, have existing plans, strategies, or studies, and are important to help us make sure that we're taking an informed approach to regional transportation. Next slide. Sorry, I got a tickle in my throat. So I guess the next question to answer is, why now? Why the JRTA now? So between July 1st, 2022 and July 1st, 2023, over 33,000 people called Nova Scotia home. New people called Nova Scotia home. The province has set aggressive targets for growth as well as climate change, and so has some of our neighboring municipalities. But to hit this population, that population and the growth targets, we also want to think about growing sustainably and making sure that the well-being of our residents is protected, and our value prop is really here as Nova Scotia. So how we grow will be very important. And we know that all of the different components have to be linked together and integrated in order to make sure that we're doing that in the right way. So really, our focus is to link all of these important things: health, education, land use, economic development, affordable and attainable housing, et cetera, all together to really think about how we make decisions around infrastructure for the province, and specifically around the transportation infrastructure. Next slide. So the Regional Transportation Plan, when our legislation was set, we were mandated to create a long-term cohesive approach to regional transportation for all modes for here in the province, in our study area. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about major corridors and infrastructure that move a large volume of people and goods. So highways and collector roadways and major bridges, key active transportation and transit links, good movement corridors, rail corridors, those types of things. So really thinking about it from a global perspective, from a regional perspective. And then how our communities are connected to each other. So whether you live in Bridgewater or whether you live in Kings County, how you're connected to the services that you need, whether it's health or whether it's secondary education like DAL or SMU or that type of thing, like how we can do that. And really we're focused on integrating transportation and land use decision-making to help kind of maximize our strategic investments as we go forward. So our study area, we don't have a provincial mandate. We are starting with a study area, as you can see on the screen, which basically covers from the Halifax Regional Municipality to Bridgewater, to Kentville, and then to Truro. If you think about that as a bit of a circle, it's about a 1 hour to 1.5 hour radius driving time. And you know, why we started there was because about 60% of our current population resides in that study area. So really starting to focus there, and then you know, working through that. The study area also includes 5 First Nations, as well as 17 historic African Nova Scotian communities, and 15 different municipalities, including HRM. So really, you know, the plan is really meant to respond to and support the region. So it's you know, with, as I said, the rapid growth and the increased demand for services and infrastructure, to think about housing affordability, to really connect our rural and suburban and urban communities together, like I said, to access services and the places that people need and want to go. So that's the study area that we're talking about when we start to talk about the regional transportation plan. So what is the regional transportation plan? So it's made up of people and goods and infrastructure, basically facilitating the movement of people and goods, and how we do that. So really thinking about what we will need as our population grows to potentially 2 million people by 2060, and as our climate impacts increase, what do we think we need for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years? And really trying to be flexible in that approach, because as we saw through the pandemic, things can change. So how do we be adaptable to the changing environment that we're in, so that we can kind of protect and be able to have a transportation system that works for now and into the future? We want to make sure that we understand how long it takes to move around, how much things will cost, how accessible the system is, how reliable is it. And this is the case for both people and goods. And that's why we have lots of people in our focus groups that's advising us, but we also have the airport and the port on our board as well. It's about leveraging what we have to grow more sustainably. So for us, so this is our schedule, and you can see we started in January 20, gosh, the days are going by. January 2021 is when we first hired a consultant to help start to develop the regional transportation plan. And so we're into early time in 2024. Our regional transportation plan is due to government in November of 2024. So we've had rounds of engagement, and Megan will get into a bit more about our first round of engagement. This is our second round of engagement, as you can see, and really trying to figure out how we're moving through this. So we've just finished up some scenario evaluation, and our team will get into that a little bit more. Next steps are in-depth assessment, and then really developing that plan. So happy to hand it over to Megan to talk a bit more about the engagement session, our engagement sessions up to this date, and kind of next steps for that. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tanya. So as Tanya mentioned, I'm going to be talking about just sort of our engagement approach up to this point, and really what we've been doing, what we've done to date, and how we're taking that information and that feedback that we're getting, and using it moving forward. So to start, this is basically a summary of who we've been engaging with. So Tanya mentioned our technical advisory board. We also have a technical working group who are the subject matter experts from each of those 6 partners. So it's really great to have kind of the leadership level are engaged, but we also have the subject matter experts working together and working with us, which has been really great. We do have a municipal working group, which is CAOs and directors of planning from the 15 municipalities that Tanya mentioned within the study area. We have a collaboration network of provincial employees, some of which I think are on the call tonight. So if you're here, hello, welcome, thank you for coming. Same with our focus groups. I think some of you are here tonight, so thank you so much for coming. We've got 4 focus groups that represent a variety of organizations, industries, community groups, just to really start to get that expertise, because we know from the conversations that we've already had on this call, transportation is incredibly important and really does impact all of us in different ways. Public engagement, which I am going to get into in the next slide, and our additional outreach. So working with community-rooted organizations to ensure that we're also speaking with people who maybe are traditionally underserved or underrepresented. We're going to talk a lot in this presentation about kind of the big data of the plan, which is all wonderful and deeply important for what we're doing. But we also want to make sure that we're not losing those first-person accounts with the transportation system and how it impacts people positively and negatively. So for our outreach so far, we've been working with One North End, who've been doing consultation with African Nova Scotian youth. The YWCA Halifax did 4 sessions for us. OSO Planning and Design did 3 sessions at Millbrook First Nation. And we're continuing these conversations, and we'll be working with the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center to hold some additional consultation for urban Indigenous communities. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you, Jordan. So a bit of a summary of stage 1 engagement, which took place in May and June of 2023. Basically, this was us introducing oourselves to you. You know, we're a new organization. As Tanya showed you on the timeline, we've really only been operating since 2023 of last year. So to introduce ourselves and to also start to ask people about their needs for the transportation system, we held 13 community pop-ups across the study area, and then also had an online engagement platform. We had meetings with our focus groups and working groups, and we were really pleased with really people coming out, sharing their ideas with us. And we got thousands of ideas from the questions that we asked, which were what is most important when traveling? What is your greatest challenge? And what transportation options do you wish you had? So that's really helpful for us as we start to build out and develop the plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we took all of that feedback, all those ideas, and we really started to see similarities. Even, you know, all the communities we visited were quite different. We talked to all sorts of different people, but we did start to see similarities. So we organized them into 6 key themes that you see here. So the first one here, create a regionally integrated public transit network. We heard the desire for transportation options beyond the regional center, and heard a lot about the lack of connections for options that do exist. Prioritize active transportation connections. We heard the need for safe and separated connections for human-powered movements, so options for walking, rolling, and cycling. And we heard much about gaps in the existing system. Again, that connectivity is really what people are asking for and really what's missing. So key theme 3, create a resilient network. While we were doing our consultation was during May and June, so it was during the wildfires taking place in Tantallon. So of course, these thoughts of resiliency were really top of mind for a lot of people, understandably so. So when we say resiliency, we're saying it both from the ability to adapt to climate impacts and extreme weather, and the ability for the system to recover from disruption. So those 2 pieces came up quite a bit. Key theme 4, be forward thinking and strategic. So really just, making sure we're being collaborative, working with people that are already working on plans to make sure we're not duplicating effort. We really are being as efficient as possible as we work. Key theme 5, accelerate the needed shift in car culture. We heard from a lot of respondents that they use their vehicle really due to lack of choice. But we also heard that this is unpleasant, it's expensive. There's lots of sort of issues that come along with using a vehicle as your primary mode of transportation. Again, back to this desire for more choice when it comes to traveling. And key theme 6 was the integration of land use planning with transportation planning investments. This was something we heard a lot from our working groups and our focus groups, was the need to better align land use and transportation planning and also ensure greater collaboration as we're working forward. Next slide, please. So we've shown you the engagement and the key themes. So we started to take what we heard and started to form it into something that would continue with the development of the plan. So what you see here are finalized vision, goals, and principles for the regional transportation plan. And the reason that these are important, and we're actually going to get into it in further slides from here, but that these were being used to measure some of the projects and policies as we get further into the work to make sure that what we're testing is actually going to achieve our goals and our vision. So under the goals, I'd like to explain them just a little bit more. Strengthen regional connections, travel between communities into regional destinations, regardless of mode or trip purpose, is safe, easy, and enjoyable. A realistic range of affordable and sustainable transportation options are available that lower household costs, emissions and car dependency, reduce fatalities and injuries, and enhance social connectivity. Enable efficient and sustainable goods movement. Essential corridors for moving goods locally and regionally are developed, preserved, and well maintained to enable the reliable movement of goods and support economic development and trade. Lead strategic investments, alignment, and implementation. Infrastructure decision-making and service delivery is cost-effective, integrated, and efficient. Actions included in the plan are ambitious yet achievable, maximizing their potential to be funded and built. Coordinate and collaborate on sustainable land use. All orders of government work to align transportation and land use across departments and initiatives. The regional transportation system supports environmentally and fiscally sustainable development, recognizing the different needs of healthy urban, suburban, and rural communities. And finally, develop a future-ready transportation system. The transportation system is resilient and adaptable, able to respond to changing trends, uncertainty, and climate change. There is consideration for technological advancements, societal changes, and the long-term needs of the system. So those are our goals. That's what we're hoping to achieve with the plan. Our principles are all aspects of the planning process are guided by these established principles. Sometimes internally, we also call these our lenses. So as we are working through decision making, we're looking at options. We're ensuring that we're viewing it from these lenses: accessibility, collaboration, equity, resiliency, sustainability, and last but certainly not least, because these are in alphabetical order, well-being. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague Dave to talk about plan progress in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Megan. So yeah, we've provided some detail about the jrta and the planning process at a high level, but now we want to provide more detail on the approach we're taking and share some of the initial results from our recent work. So in the past, plans like this would typically assume a future that's much like the present. This would be done by using a point forecast and planning for a single future, or maybe adding some modest variations to that forecast and producing a small range of futures. But in both cases, the future is often assumed to be much like the present, and trends of today are largely carried forward into the future. The problem with this, though, is that the world's complex and the future is becoming increasingly uncertain. And recent events have shown us it's that long-term plans can become quickly outdated. In the past decade, Nova Scotia is a great example of this, with population starting to grow at a faster rate in the mid-2010s, but that changed to rapid growth over the last few years during the pandemic. And along with the significant growth, the pandemic also introduced greater work from home rates that have reshaped travel patterns to some extent. So these are just some examples, or a few examples that demonstrate why we need to account for a wider range of possible futures. So this is where scenario planning comes in. And so it's a proven approach to address this uncertainty and help make plans like the Regional Transportation Plan responsive to a range of future conditions. With this approach, we explore multiple possible futures to help inform present-day decisions. The result is a set of scenarios which combine the interaction of multiple variables and trends and different sets of assumptions to represent a range of very different futures. And so some of these external factors and trends include artificial intelligence, climate impacts, connected autonomous vehicles, among others. So the approach is used to really stress the transportation system in different ways than it is today and help identify what projects and policies are the most robust and resilient in different conditions. So in other words, we're testing the transportation system in these different futures to help us figure out what strategies make the most sense and will be the most successful across a range of possible futures. So that's more the why behind we're using this approach, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the different steps that we're using in this plan. So the first key step was developing the scenarios. So these are based off a local scenario planning exercise within Nova Scotia in the provincial government. The work's been supplemented with HDR's expertise and the jrta local knowledge, as well as input from our working groups, and focus groups provide more focus on the implications for regional transportation, but they're really anchored in this provincial initiative. So with the scenarios established, we then identified and gathered input on potential transportation projects and policies. And as Megan mentioned, that included testing ideas that were submitted through the first stage of engagement. And the third step is to then conduct some high-level modeling to evaluate transportation projects and policies across that range of potential futures to try to get a sense of how effective they are. And ultimately, what this is serving to do is provide some initial screening of potential projects and policies that will then help us focus our work in the next phase of the project and ultimately the draft plan. So before handing over to HDR to talk a little bit about these scenarios and the conceptual projects and policies, as well as take you through some of those results, I want to highlight again that even though we're looking into the future with these scenarios, they're not a desired future state or a vision for the province or the region. They're not trying to predict exactly what will happen. As we said before, it's the aim is to try to cover a wide range of futures, possible futures, that stress the system in different ways to help us make informed decisions today and develop a system that can be successful in a variety of futures. So I'm emphasizing that point as we don't want you to get focus too much on the specifics of the scenarios. There's a large number of factors and variables that could be combined and an almost endless number of scenarios that could be created, but we've come up with a limited number to keep it manageable while still providing that range of futures. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reese to take you through the next section.
Thank you, Dave. So, as Dave has noted, we have several different scenarios, each representing different ways in which the future could conceivably unfold. And I would like to take you through each of these in turn. So, at a high level, as we see on this chart, each scenario is defined in two main ways, in terms of, firstly, population growth, higher versus lower absolute numbers of people and jobs, and secondly, development patterns from more dispersed growth across our whole study area compared with more compact growth focused largely on Halifax's urban center. And of course, both of these attributes will have a big impact on how people travel, where and how much, which is the range that we want to test. So this chart will show how they line up relative to each other in order to highlight the relative differences between the scenarios. First of all, in the middle, we have our business as usual case. This is the most similar to a future that just extrapolates current trends, conventional approach, and continuing recent growth patterns that we've seen over the last few years into a long-term future. So this is sort of the basis against which everything else is compared. So this will take the population of HRM from just over 500,000 today to a future with over 1 million, with an additional 250,000 in the rest of the study area. We also have some relatively high growth scenarios. Firstly, a localized tech transformation, which is high growth, high tech future with a lot of compact growth that's centered around HRM's core. We have a rural resurgence, which is also high population growth, but more focused on growth in areas outside the Halifax urban area with more smaller and self-sufficient communities. And then we have a widespread regional growth, which combines elements of the other two. It has higher growth, but growth that occurs both in urban and suburban, more rural type areas. Then we have two lower growth scenarios that explore what lower levels of immigration and interprovincial migration might look like. One that's historic trends, essentially a lower growth future with an aging population, limited economic growth, and dealing with costs of climate change. And finally, global tension, where there's moderate growth overall, and that growth is only really in a couple of primary industries within HRM, and therefore more compact. Have the next slide. Thanks. So the 6 high-level scenarios that I just described are distinguished from each other by what we call uncontrollable or external factors. And that means they're defined by external influences, including the levels of growth and of location, as was emphasized by where they were placed on that chart. But also levels of technological development, degree of climate impact, changes overall in how people behave and travel. So we don't get to decide what's actually going to happen in the future, but we need to design a future transportation system that's responsive or resilient to whatever may happen. And together, these scenarios present a challenge that, in developing our long-term transportation plan for the region, we need to meet. And we can do this through policy or infrastructure or a combination of both. And so in this step, we've tried firstly to identify potential large policy or infrastructure interventions, and then to see what effect they may have if we apply them to the future scenarios in terms of growth and location that we've just looked at. So as there are a lot of possible projects or policies to look at, we've grouped them by themes called bundles or thematic bundles. Firstly, all of these bundles include committed projects. So these are the ones that either already exist or are in the process of being built or implemented, and which we can assume are in place whatever the future may hold. And then we have 5 bundles of projects to add to these. We have one that focuses more on road infrastructure, one that's a hybrid of road, transit, active transportation, and policy, but leaning more towards road. One that focuses primarily on policy interventions, another one that's a hybrid of road, transit, active transportation, and policy, but focusing more towards the transit and active transportation side, and then one that's focusing mainly on transit and active transportation infrastructure interventions. And some projects may be in more than one bundle, depending on the theme. So these were built on themes, each representing a potential approach to transportation planning in the region, some more focused, some more balanced. And at this stage, we're not looking to confirm or remove individual ones. We're more looking for guidelines on how to structure our approach in the detailed analysis that we will move on to in the next stage, and what combinations really seem to work better than others. So looking at the projects and policies that we've identified and how we've grouped them. These come from our engagement to date, and that includes ideas that were submitted in the first stage of engagement, as well as discussions among our various groups. And I'll show progressively how they've been built up. So each of the descriptions I'm going to show represents a sample of the projects and policies that are being evaluated. They're not exhaustive of everything that was necessarily tested. But starting with the committed projects, these are ones that are common to all bundles, as well as being tested on their own to see what happens if we don't do anything other than build these. So these are our projects currently under construction, funded, or highly likely to be funded, including projects such as the McKay Bridge rehabilitation, that includes some provision for active transportation facilities, some highway twinning projects, improvements to rail freight in the port area, as examples. Now, if we look at bundle 1, this one represents mainly major road projects, generally identified through previous plans and studies. And in many cases, I should just note, we are testing previously identified projects and policies, but we just feel it's important to note that some of the underlying context has changed for these previously identified projects. We're now looking at them with a broader regional lens and how they contribute to mobility across the whole study area. So some examples in this bundle include several highway improvements such as 102, 113, 107 extension, Beaverbank bypass, a third harbor crossing, as well as a full replacement of the McKay Bridge. Next, looking at bundle 2, this one was a hybrid focus where there were some major road projects. This was also combined with moderate transit and active transportation projects and a mixture of transportation policies. So, for example, a replacement of the McKay Bridge, making sure to include active transportation facilities, Highway 113, and but also some transit, regional transit connections, intermunicipal, enhancing transit service frequency and reliability, adding in a new ferry connection to Shannon Park as well. Next bundle is the policy focus. And this one's less focused on new infrastructure and more on managing, getting the best use out of existing infrastructure and hoping to manage how much and how people travel through a set of transportation policies. Some of those include sort of looking at pricing options, whether that's through parking costs, through transit fares, through enhancement to some of our development, transit-oriented development focus, improvements to the active transportation network and improvements to transit reliability and frequency, and sort of making better use of the network by facilitating transit operating on its own lanes. So a combination of policies. Then bundle 4 is in some ways similar to number 2, but it's more adjusted towards non-car infrastructure with more of the larger transit and active transportation enhancements, including sort of some more bus rapid transit, the McKay Bridge replacement, including transit priority, and extensive regional transit service, including aspects of transit priority, the improvements to transit frequency and reliability, and regional active transportation network improvements. So there are some that are common to several bundles that they really can be included under multiple focus points. So the final bundle is the transit focus and includes a range of major transit and active transportation projects, some of which have been studied previously, some of which have not. So this represents the greatest extent of transit and active transportation focus and looks at numerous projects, including a third harbor crossing and McKay Bridge replacement, which include transit priority measures and active transportation, a network of additional ferry routes providing additional capacity and connectivity, urban rapid transit, including LRT or BRT and connections to the airport, regional or commuter rail service, as well as the active transportation network improvements and enhanced transit service frequency and reliability. So those are the bundles. And having developed all of these, we then had to find a way of comparing them to each other. And we took what's known as a sketch modeling approach for this. And this really represents at a high level a range of conceptual scenarios where there is a wide range of possibilities that exist when we're looking often at long-term growth, and we want to capture impacts of the adoption of new technologies such as connected and automated vehicles, or long-term behavioral disruptions such as the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, that we want to look at a range of impacts as have been used in the scenarios that we defined. So the sketch model overlays new trends on top of a basis of planned growth and kind of stretches the system in different directions. And it enables us to test a wide variety of options quickly and efficiently, which is what we wanted to do here. So it doesn't look into specifics like how many people are turning left at a given intersection, or how many riders there are on an individual bus route, which is what we might do with a short-term traffic model. Instead, we're looking to identify travel flows such as major corridors, how these are expected to grow over time, and how different levels of capacity and service that are provided on those corridors will be able or not be able to deal with that future demand. And once we get some direction through this process, we'll be moving on to a more detailed look at some individual projects and policies in the next stage of our work. So, to evaluate the performance of our different bundles relative to each other, when we applied them to different scenarios, we looked at some key measures to quantify their impact. And some of those are shown here. This list isn't exhaustive, but it does have a lot of the major measures that we looked at, such as mode share, percentage of people who can travel by modes other than private vehicle, average travel time, access times to freight generators, that's for goods movement and trucks, accessibility to employment, average trip distance, the time lost to congestion compared with the time it would take sort of traveling under uncongested conditions, and the numbers of collisions and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, each of these measures is then tied to at least one of our 5 goals, which were introduced and described earlier, sometimes more of them, as some of these measures address more of these goals, more than one of these goals. But what this means is that if we have a bundle that performs well against these measures, they will also be moving us towards achieving our goals. Or if we're comparing a bundle to another bundle, it will be showing a better alignment to those goals. So in evaluating, we consider each of the 5 goals to be weighted equally. So we consider each of these goals equally important to each other, and sort of add up the relative performance against each of them to arrive at a final ranking in terms of performance against goals for all the bundle scenario combinations. And so now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jordan to talk about how these ended up comparing to each other, to our sort of committed BAU starting point and to existing conditions in the study area. So over to you, Jordan.
Hi, everyone. So as mentioned, we have 6 future scenarios and 7 thematic bundles to evaluate. With some exceptions for the low growth scenarios, each bundle is tested for each scenario, which means we have quite a lot of scenario bundle combinations to compare. We're going to show this graphically so you can see how bundles perform within each scenario as well as across scenarios. For today, for simplicity, we're only going to focus on the high growth scenarios, as they're the ones that really stress the transportation system, while the low growth scenario bundle combinations all generally perform pretty well. As my colleague has indicated, this is a data-driven process. There are a dozen different measures of effectiveness which are used to evaluate each scenario bundle combination. And we also have evaluated them for different geographies within the region, such as the regional center, suburban area, and the areas beyond them. The thing is, though, that's a lot of information, too much information. So again, for simplicity, today we're therefore going to focus solely on the overall rankings for the region as a whole. While there are some minor variations when we look at specific measures of effectiveness or at specific parts of the region, the overall results effectively highlight the common trends across measures of effectiveness, goals, and geographies without needing to dive too deeply into the weeds of the detailed analyses. So with that said, we can now begin working our way to the full set of results. To make sure that everyone is able to follow along, we're going to build up our graph piece by piece. As a first step, here you will see that on the x-axis, we have the high growth future scenarios, as well as 2022 for comparison. Then, on the y-axis, we have our overall score with a scale from 0 to 40. The legend on the side shows the color and number of each bundle as they will appear on our chart. Now we can start adding in the data. For now, we'll just do one of these scenarios, the BAU, which is shown in the BAU column on the chart. You can now see the relative performance of each bundle within the BAU scenario. For example, bundles 2 and 4 are the highest, with scores between 25 and 30, while bundle 0 is the lowest, with a score of about 5. Bundles 1, 3, and 5 hover roughly in the middle, with scores around 15 to 20. On the right, you can see an arrow showing that higher is better. In other words, the closer a bundle is to the top of the graph, the better it performs. Now we will add in another scenario, local tech transformation. Just as before, you can see how bundles compare within that one scenario, but now you can also start to make comparisons between scenarios. As shown here, a strong performer in one scenario may not perform as well in another, and vice versa. For example, bundle 1 is third place in the 2060 BAU with a score of 5, but second last in local tech transformation with a score of around 11. Okay, now we have filled out our entire chart. We have results in each column, which represent how the different bundles perform for each scenario. However, this is kind of overwhelming. It's still unclear as to which bundles perform well and which perform less well. To add some context, we're going to add a few lines. The dotted line in light gray, about halfway from the top of the graph, shows 2022 conditions, with a score of about 17 or 18. The black dotted line near the bottom of the graph shows committed 2060 business as usual, with a score of around 5. The gray and black lines split the graph into 3 sections. As a final step, we can classify those 3 sections. Bundles in the top green section are improved over the committed BAU and 2022. Bundles in the middle orange section are improved over committed BAU, but they're not as good as 2022. Finally, bundles in the bottom section are worse than present day and the committed BAU. We now have our completed graph and can clearly see how our bundles are performing in and across the scenarios. The key takeaway of all this is that in most scenarios, bundles 2 and 4, the hybrid bundles, are the top performers overall. This is because of their multi-pronged approach. In contrast, the more singularly focused bundles 1 and 5 do not perform as well. We can also note that the committed projects only bundles perform poorly, particularly in the highest growth scenarios, local tech transformation and widespread regional growth. As I mentioned, we've done similar analyses for the various MOE that have fed into this final score, and for different geographies such as the regional center, suburban area, and the areas of the region beyond them. While there are some differences and variations, these takeaways are more or less consistent across the range of technical analyses that we have completed. Those takeaways are summarized again here on this slide. As I said, though this does vary by location, singularly focused bundles 1 and 5 are generally not as effective as the multi-pronged bundles 2 and 4. Bundles 2, 3, and 4 tend to be more impactful as policy solutions have more significant network-wide impacts compared to infrastructure projects, whose impacts are more localized. Finally, committed projects only are not enough to achieve the transportation objectives of the study, which makes sense considering the level of growth that is anticipated. There are a few other considerations to keep in mind, which stem from the rest of our analytical work. First, there is a potential for a considerable number of short distance trips in the future due to greater density, which can encourage significant active transportation growth. Second, the effectiveness of high-order transit depends on the strength of local transit connections, particularly outside of the Halifax Regional Center and suburban area. Third, zero-occupancy vehicles could have a significant impact on congestion, particularly in the local tech transformation and widespread regional growth scenarios, even with new infrastructure. Think about that as your car drives you to work in the morning and then drives home. And then in the afternoon, it drives to pick you up and then drives home again. Left unchecked, this could, in theory, as much as double the number of trips on the network. So, as a reminder, these results reflect our high-level sketch modeling exercise of different possible futures. They're a first pass or initial screening of potential transportation solutions to see what are the most promising and what could be the most effective across a wide range of futures. This analysis will be expanded upon in our next phase of work, the in-depth transportation assessment. With that, I will now pass it back to Dave to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Jordan. So we just want to, before we get to questions, just provide a quick sense of where we're going and what the next steps are for the plan. Go to the next slide. So we're holding a series of drop-in sessions over the last 2 weeks of February. Our team will be out at 12 locations throughout the study area, sharing similar information as this presentation. But if you're wanting to meet in person and ask more questions, we'll be out there. So we'll be posting those dates. Actually, the dates and times and locations are on our website, our engagement site, jrta.ca, and that'll be at the end of the presentation as well. In terms of the plan, as Jordan mentioned, this is the work to date is kind of that initial screening, but we're going to be moving into a more detailed analysis, looking at projects and policies using a new travel demand model, and Mark mentioned that. So WSP and University of Toronto are developing that, and allow for more in-depth modeling and analysis, getting more so things like specific levels of ridership on different routes, that sort of thing. We'll also be using a more comprehensive set of measures at that point to evaluate items, including access to employment and services, travel costs, implementation costs, among others. And following that, as Tanya mentioned, we'll be working on a draft plan and focusing on an implementation plan that explores different funding models and identifies early deliverables to support the movement from planning to implementation rapidly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and help facilitate some questions.
Great, thank you, Dave, and thanks for that presentation. We already have some questions popping into the Q&A, but if you would like to ask a question, you're welcome to either type them into the Q&A or raise your hand again, as last time. Or I'll just kind of plan. I'll start out with what's already in the Q&A, and I'll plan to go back and forth a bit. So maybe a first question coming from the Q&A chat here is a kind of a double question. Where will the ideas collected to date be listed somewhere for viewing? And also, will this presentation be sent to participants for future reference and further study? And I think I'll hand that one over to Megan.
Yeah, I can answer that. Great question. So the answer for will the ideas to date be listed somewhere for viewing? Absolutely. So what we'll likely do, similar to what we did for stage one, we did a what we heard document, which summarized basically all of this feedback that we received, just to make sure that we are keeping it in mind, collecting it. We're really keeping top of mind what's important to people. That will be collected and included in the what we heard report, which I'd be happy to share with everybody here once it's available. And to answer the question, will the presentation be sent to participants for future reference? We're recording this presentation. So once we're done here, I will be uploading that to our YouTube channel and our website. And again, happy to share with everybody so that you've got a copy and you can share it and you can look at it a little more in depth. Thank you for the question.
Great, thanks, Megan. And let's go to a live question from Shane O'Neill.
Oh, sorry, that was me. Just 1 second, folks. There we go. Sorry about that, Shane.
Can you hear me all right now?
We can.
Okay. I think the exercise you're doing is very complicated, and I appreciate the time and effort you've put on this. And I think that it's a little bit like trying to grab smoke in a way, because it's I'm confused a little bit about the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail. In other words, if there were regional centers that were identified to focus development and concentration of not just residential development, but also commercial development centers, then the transportation network could be built to service those centers in a most effective way. If in fact it's a bit amorphous and it's going to continue to sort of unfold sort of with a little bit of entropy, then you're always going to be chasing your own tail, I think, to a certain degree. So I guess I know one of the presenters said that they're going to be actually dealing with this as more information comes forward. But can you just address the idea of transportation chasing some potential development versus development being identified and then transportation being developed to service it?
Yes, thank you so much, Shane. And I think this is, very much connected to the relationship between transportation planning and land use planning, but I'm going to kick that over to Matt.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Matt Neville, I'm a planner with the JRTA. I think that's a really great question, Shane. So when we talk about the integration of land use and transportation, I mean, it's very much a critical aspect of the work we're doing. I would say our starting point for all of this work are the visions and plans that have already been established by the municipalities through engagement they're already doing or have done with the communities. So there's already a lot of great work in this. They're already thinking a lot about land use and a lot of the things you're talking about and where it's going. So our role is really to understand that. We look to them for their input on anticipated growth, because it's often related to servicing questions too, which is more separate from some of the work we're doing. But so we look to them to share that information with us through a municipal working group or technical working group. So they provide us input on anticipated growth, development pressures they're facing, and then we work with that information and work it into our models. We do provide some input in this work on housing related issues in particular. So for example, HRM is going through regional plan review right now. There's questions about potential changes through the Housing Accelerator Fund. There's work through the Executive Panel on Housing. And what we try to do is offer a regional transportation lens on these issues. I would say the JRTA is not leading or directly involved in land use in these types of land use decisions, but we're actively engaged in those conversations. We try to participate and contribute where possible to ensure that what we're doing properly reflects that. So it's a little bit back and forth, but as far as making those decisions on land use, I mean, that's not something we're directly leading. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Matt. So I'm going to go to a question from Bruce. Your planning parameters are centered only really on population growth and development pattern, centralized versus dispersed. This raises a few questions about the time horizon planning for the exercises.
There's a second question related to that. Why not consider scenarios like increased remote work, aging population, student populations? Yeah, there's a couple of the variables there, but I think Reese, would you be able to speak to that one?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think although we showed in that chart, we showed sort of population and sort of distribution of population kind of as the primary definers for the scenarios, but those were not the only parameters that those considered. There were also sort of associated other aspects, which did include sort of prevalence of technology, different behavioral patterns that were connected to those. So they were sort of broader images of the future than just land use allocation. So we did try and capture a range of travel conditions. In terms of the time horizon, we were looking out to a 2 million population for Nova Scotia, which is looking around 40 years into the future for the long-term analysis.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm curious. There's a few questions here about where, I don't know. This is hard. They're kind of popping and moving.
There's a question about the policy bundles and including camera legislation. Maybe Reese, that would be a good one for you.
Sure. Yes, I saw that. I mean, there's something like speed camera legislation. That's definitely something that would look at for like potentially achieving, I think, some of these policies. What we've been testing so far has been fairly broad. It's sort of been a collection of sort of policies designed to encourage mode shift or encourage certain travel patterns. So it would be in there as a piece. It wouldn't be necessarily called out individually with a lot of these. But as we do move forward into the in-depth analysis, we'll be taking a finer lens at some of these and breaking them out individually.
So there's a question. It seems that highway improvements were included in all but one bundle, while commuter rail was only included in the transit and AT focus. Is there a reason for that?
Reese, you're good.
That's me again. Yeah, I mean, the aim really was to look at a spectrum for both road and transit. And some of that may not have quite come across in terms of how we showed it on the slide there, but I mean, transit has sort of different levels of expansion from sort of enhanced sort of existing like transit priority, moving up to like BRT, then like light rail, and then commuter. So commuter rail would be sort of the maximum case. Highways, it's a bit more of a nebulous concept that there's different levels of highway improvement. So sort of the maximum highway improvements were just in the maximum road bundle, and then there were different levels of highway improvements in the other ones, in the same way as transit kind of was scaled across the bundles.
Great, thank you. And I think this is another one for HDR. Have you done any scenario planning for hurricanes, sea level rising, and weather events / natural disasters and other transformative events, such as how COVID has affected transportation?
That's I can answer that one. I mean, yes is the short answer. In terms of COVID and how that's affected sort of how people travel, and as well as sort of how they choose to travel, I mean, yes, that's something that we've considered. Sort of, we've considered like a range of sort of proportion of people who travel to work as opposed to working from home, and different rates, sort of on the understanding that no one really knows sort of where we will land in terms of proportion of telecommuting, but it's going to be much more prevalent in future, we can probably assume than it was pre-pandemic, but that sort of established a paradigm that is now set. So yes, I mean, no, we had different levels of assumption regarding sort of levels of telecommuting in sort of built in to the scenarios that we defined. In terms of sort of climate characteristics, and yes, each of the scenarios did have sort of defined climate characteristics associated with those, which had some impact on travel infrastructure, as well as some of the willingness to travel. It was at a fairly high level at the level of analysis we were doing so far. We weren't sort of closing off individual roads or access points, but we did have sort of levels of assumption in terms of the extent of infrastructure and network available, and some of our defining characteristics of the scenarios were sort of weather and climate related.
Great, thank you, Reese. Here's another one. Can this plan be integrated with the green plan for HRM, National Urban Park Planning as well for active and commuter planning? And I'll kick that over to Matt.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's sort of picking up on the last one I answered. And I think as Shane, when you started your question, the question you asked, the last one I answered, I mean, you talked about the complexity of the work, and this type of modeling work is very complex and it can be very abstract kind of at this level. So sometimes some of these kind of this consultation or engagement with the public on some of this work is a little more challenging. It's also one of the reasons that we're really relying on the work done to date by municipal units and by other community organizations, where they've done a lot of great work on developing on plans, on spatial plans, on policies, really at that more local or community level. And there's a lot of really good work there. So that really is the starting point for all of this, is to really build off that work that's been done and then layer on these potential changes or possible futures or some of this uncertainty, and see how the transportation system can be integrated into that growth, into that development in a way that makes sense. So, we're kind of working at a very high level now. It's a bit of a funnel, focused more on flows, but then as we kind of work through it, there's another stage that is more around detailed modeling, and you start to get a better sense of how this work intersects or interacts with some of those other plans. And then the next step after that, I mean, you kind of drill down to more detailed design and implementation. So as you work through that, you're kind of continuing to intersect with some of those plans and work that have already been done. And certainly the plans that you reference, the HRM Green Network has already been, that information has already been brought forward and is part of some of the modeling work that's been done to date, and will continue to be part of the work as we go forward.
Great, thank you. And I just want to offer again that if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question by voice, that's also an option. And maybe let's go ahead and hear one from the voices. Anne. I think Megan's gonna let Anne in, and then when she's here,
Yeah, it's I'm just Anne,
like...
are you able to come off of mute?
I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry about that. I think your plan is, I'm so impressed with the young people today. Anyway, you're doing an outstanding job. I just want to know if you can overlay or integrate the green plan for the HRM, the legislated changes to forestry for the province, because some areas that we need active transportation in are way out in the eastern shore, and as well integrate active and commuter planning so that people can walk in wilderness areas to get to work, that kind of thing.
Maybe I can just jump in quickly on that one. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Anne, and I thank you for mentioning that. I think a lot of it speaks to the importance of corridor planning and the understanding of kind of these key corridors within the region. And I think, the suggestion around, other kind of forestry plans or, wilderness areas. I mean, there's a whole number of kind of provincial pieces that can fit into that. So that is certainly the emphasis on those regional connections, those key regional connections. I mean, whether they be road, transit, or AT are really important. And then it's the integration of how they connect into that local AT network to provide that access across the region. So appreciate that comment, and it's something we'll take back as a team and work through that.
Great, thank you. How about what will the draft and final plans look like? Will this follow directly into implementation, or will that be developed separately?
I can jump in on that one. So we're talking about working together. So basically, as part of the draft plan will be an implementation plan. I think our focus is really making things that can be implemented. I'm sure a lot of people on this call have worked on plans that have sat on the shelf. So trying to make it as best set it up for success as possible is really our focus, and Tanya reminds us of that every day.
Thank you. Okay, maybe this one is for HDR. Black box modeling is not conducive to a participatory discussion. There are many normative judgments underlying those ratings. How can we discuss the weights? For example, no matter which scenario you have in mind, there will be people aging in place in rural communities. How will those without a car or cannot drive move in urban and rural areas? What weight do they receive in the scenarios? How about the health of our communities?
Okay. Jensen, thank you. That is a great question. And so as a modeler, I know that a model, first and foremost, is a tool. It's not a substitute for informed judgment, and that's always the first principle to remember when modeling. Yes, there's a lot of judgment that needs to go into sort of setting this up and deciding on sort of how to structure the evaluation. But in terms of weighting, we have we're kind of focusing on the key goals and aiming to treat them as equivalent to each other, sort of equally weighted, and to develop a system that would address each of those. And if we have a system that addresses 4 but not the other, then we want to find a way to fill that gap as well. And one aspect that's definitely very important is to establish mobility for everyone, regardless of their ability to drive or have access to a car, and to provide a sort of comprehensive network of alternative transportation that will connect them. So, I mean, that will feed into our evaluation of options, and especially when we get to the more detailed analysis where we can actually sort of break down communities into different person types to some degree more than what we're doing at the moment, where it's pretty aggregated. That will be key, I'd say, to sort of identifying our networks that they will need to be a system that's capable of serving everyone. And I mean, the same goes for meeting health and establishing healthy communities. That's also sort of part of our evaluation.
I can maybe just add a little bit to that as well, just one from what Reese said. So I will say the idea of transportation equity is an important part of the work. It's it's one kind of our core principles. We certainly know that transportation access is key to economic stability, overall well-being for residents. Transportation equity is really about access to affordable, reliable, safe transportation options. So the intent is for the regional transportation plan to consider distinct needs of groups that, have been either underserved or underrepresented, historically or structurally underrepresented. And to put an equity lens on this, as we work through into the more, again, this funnel of projects to help us prioritize and make recommendations on some of the important projects and initiatives that can make a big difference. You're certainly right. We're basing a lot of the work on available demographic household data to understand the needs. The data that's available to us. We also recognize that data doesn't tell the whole story. So to confirm the issues, our assumptions, to ensure that we have a good understanding, we have been doing this additional outreach, trying to layer on some more qualitative understanding of some of these issues, some of the very distinct issues that are being faced by different groups around the province or within the region, and trying to work with trusted community partners and organizations to help us in some of those conversations. And as we work through it, the idea is to continue to layer on that information and to help in that kind of decision-making or final prioritization of projects.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask this one. What regional transportation options other than personal vehicles were included in bundles 1 through 4? I think maybe Dave.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. So we kind of set those bundles up to test a range of different things. So the first one was primarily focused on road infrastructure. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Jordan. There are some of those committed projects are also embedded within one, but one is primarily focused on vehicles, whereas 4 is more of the mix, and it's including transit investments, active transportation investments as well. So, but they are really set up so we can kind of test and evaluate different aspects of things, and sometimes test things in isolation to try to determine, what the level of influence and benefit is for each of those. I think there was another question around the Bedford Ferry, and we've grouped it in with the committed projects as there's been some work to date on that, and so thinking that is likely a project to be funded in the horizon of the plan. So thanks for that.
Great, thanks. Let's go to the hands raised up. Jason Colville.
Yeah, I think. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, excellent. The question I have for you is, I see a lot in here about public transportation, transit, and I see a lot of people use public transit as their only means to really get around because for various reasons, their ability to do active transportation is limited. And it seems to me in this plan that there's definitely going to be some consideration of different types of public transit feeding each other. And I wonder what kind of consideration has been given to how community transportation organizations such as Musco Rider, for example, or Bay Rides on the South Shore can feed into Halifax transit services, and ultimately how those services can also feed into other regional players such as Maritime Bus and Via Rail, because I think it's a serious obstacle to people using public transportation where these units don't coordinate and work well with each other. And I'm wondering what kind of consideration has been given to that.
Okay. I can take that one. Yes, that's something definitely that we recognize the importance of, sort of the need to connect different transit agencies to each other, that having isolated transit services that don't provide feeder services connecting to each other doesn't help with creating a connected network. So that's something we've tested at a high level so far. We've essentially enhanced, without sort of going into details of sort of which organization is going to be providing feeder service or sort of what size of bus they're going to have or anything like that. We've looked at enhancing sort of regional connectivity as well as access connectivity. So people have shorter travel times to access transit, as well as enhanced or reduced transfer times between different transit service levels. So, I mean, yes, that is kind of built into the scenarios that we've been testing, and we've been looking to see what the potential impact is on transit use if we improve some of those connections. And this is something that, we've seen some of these bundles performing well. As we do go to the next level, we'll want to dig into that some more and see sort of, well, what type of service level do we need to provide, and sort of how are these connections going to work? Because that is sort of a key piece, I think, to this plan, to look at that sort of interagency and regional connectivity by transit.
Well, I agree with you. I think it's something that has to be considered, because for public transportation to work, obviously there will be a role for the community and the taxpayer to take part, but there has to be a level of connectivity so that it's practical for people to use these services, or else these services will wane and the ridership will not build, and it's very hard to justify the financing of these services.
Okay, thank you. And so let's go to this question. Will this plan complement the goals set out by Nova Scotia's Access by Design 2030? Will there or has there been collaboration with the Nova Scotia Accessibility Directorate? And I think this will be the last question.
Yeah, it's another good question. I mean, the intent of the plan is around, or focus of the plan is around transportation or access to the transportation system for everyone. There has been some engagement and consultation carried out with the Accessibility Directorate for the province. There's also been some engagement and consultation with representatives within the accessibility community through some focus groups that we have set up as well. I would say just on this, I mean, and this is the kind of the question of the scale we're working at. So at this point, kind of in our process, our focus is on the idea of broad accessibility. When we think about the term accessibility, broad accessibility to the network itself. In respect to the built environment, which I think is kind of where the question is getting to, the province is in the process of establishing a public transportation standard development committee to help remove barriers to accessibility in public transit. So that is kind of the next level of design as we talk about projects to implement, but it will be an important part of any implementation strategy, and we'd work with our partners to integrate this work. I would say just on that, there is still a call for committee members still open. So if there's anyone who has a particular interest in that, you can visit the Accessibility Directorate webpage for more information as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to say, if your question didn't get answered yet, you're in good company. There's a huge abundance of questions here, and it's really exciting. I think a big outcome of this engagement was to really understand what you want to know. And so the JRTA will be following up with answers to all of these questions in a kind of FAQ document. And we will, JRTA will email you when that's on the website live so that you can check back. And I just, want to say thank you all for coming. And I hope if you're moving somewhere else from where you are currently to get home tonight, that you travel very safely. Maybe can I kick it over to Megan to just talk about ways to stay in touch?
Sure, for sure. So as Sarah mentioned, I will be in contact with you folks via email to let you know two things. One, when the frequently asked questions, addressing the questions that we did not get to tonight, is posted, and also to let you know when the recording is available should you want to share it or watch it again and relive the memories. Also, if you want to get in touch with us, here's how you can do it. You can send us an email at info@jrta.ca. That goes to me. So if you want to address it directly to me, please feel free to do so. Either one of our websites full of information. We've got social media channels, so LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Should you want to connect with us there, again, you'll be talking to me. So now that you've met with me, feel free to, if you want to address me by name, please go ahead. And just on behalf of everybody here, a genuine thank you for joining us. I know it's Tuesday night, day before Valentine's Day. It's very much appreciated, and we thank you. So with that, I know everybody else's time is very valuable, so we'll call it there. Thanks again, everybody.